We're in a time where cultural sensitivity is at the height of human consciousness, and this is a great opportunity for us to invest in learning how to communicate with each other despite our differences. This course will help you to communicate respectfully and connect authentically with your colleagues. Hi, my name is Kwame Christian, and I'm the founder and CEO of the American Negotiation Institute, where we believe the best things in life are on the other side of difficult conversations. In this course, I'm blending the negotiation and conflict resolution skills to create a framework that empowers you to have these difficult conversations. My goal is to help you avoid some common pitfalls and structure these conversations in a way that makes it more likely for you to connect in ways that are constructive and not destructive. Have you ever felt fear before or during a culturally sensitive conversation? You're not alone. It's natural to feel fear, but that feeling can hold you back. Understanding your fear is the first step to overcoming anxiety and developing the confidence to have these discussions in a productive way. What scares you in a conversation may be different from what scares me. So let me tell you the story of a colleague named Kim. Kim was a proud ally for racial equity until a casual conversation with a diverse group of friends shook her confidence. She shared a perspective on a news headline that dealt with race in America. The conversation took a negative turn, and she and one of the friends haven't spoken since. Now, we can all think of times where we've either been involved in or observed conversations that went poorly. It can make future conversations intimidating. I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to want to hear. You're going to make mistakes. Now, I'm going to say something that I don't want to hear. I'm still going to make mistakes. For example, at a speaking event, I accidentally used a non-inclusive term during a presentation titled How to Have Inclusive Conversations. It was embarrassing, and I apologized, and the presentation ended well. We're all human, but the biggest mistake you can make is avoiding these conversations. What does more damage in a relationship? Trying your best and making a mistake, or not trying at all? Here's the thing. Offense is an unavoidable part of any human interaction. In fact, if you're not making any mistakes, it's probably a sign that you're not spending enough time with people who are different from you. To be clear, I am not advocating for you to go out and be reckless and offend everybody. I'm saying that you need to not let the fear of mistakes stop you from having these difficult conversations. Maya Angelou said, "Do your best until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." I would take it a step further. When you know better, do better, and forgive yourself when you fall short. If you're a person who's willing to take a course like this, you're likely already approaching these conversations with a baseline level of respect for the other person. That alone will lead you to make fewer mistakes. Would driving in terrible weather conditions change the way that you drive? Of course it would. How often do we stop to consider the conditions within our own mind before having a conversation? Not often enough. We all have biases, but these don't necessarily make us bad. They make us human. We most often hear the term bias when referring to prejudice against people arising from things like race, gender, sexual orientation, or disability. But more broadly, a bias is just a preference towards something or a prejudice against something. We all exhibit bias in some form in all aspects of our life. In order to conserve energy, our brain organizes the incredible amount of information it receives into categories. This is great when classifying low-level things like toothpaste and cereal, but it can be highly problematic when it comes to categorizing people. For example, if you hold stereotypes or prejudices about a particular culture, you may make incorrect assumptions about the other person, which can lead to misunderstandings or offense. This is why it is so important to be aware of one's own biases and to make a conscious effort to set them aside during culturally sensitive conversations. These kinds of biases are a barrier to true connection and understanding. Because we can't change our implicit biases, the first step to overcoming our biases is to recognize them. To do so, you have to be willing to slow down and question your assumptions. A quick reality check can help. When you're making a decision or coming to a conclusion, just ask yourself these two simple questions. Number one, what assumption am I making? And number two, how do I know this to be true? These two questions will help you to think through the situation more objectively and, as a result, will increase the likelihood that you're basing your decision on reason and data rather than feelings and bias. Take a moment now to think about an example from your life. Have you ever formed an opinion about a person based on their perceived cultural background? Ask yourself, what was your assumption? How did you know it was true? Do you see how easy it is for you to be influenced by bias? We need to develop the habit of slowing down and examining our thought processes to prevent bias from creeping in. Let's assume that bias is impacting how you think and act, because it probably is, and then work to minimize that impact with a bias check. Now be honest. Do you actually take the time to prepare strategically before these difficult conversations? If you're like most people, the answer is no. But don't worry. By the end of this video, you'll learn a simple approach for preparation that is strategically and practically effective. One common mistake comes from failing to understand the difference between preparing for a conversation and research. Learning about the topic at hand and seeking to learn about the other culture is an important first step, but that alone does not constitute thorough preparation. You need to prepare strategically. When you're not prepared, you make avoidable mistakes and are surprised by things that you should have seen coming. Not surprisingly, this has a negative impact on your performance. It's easy to overcomplicate preparation, but it's better to just keep it simple. I suggest you use what I call the 3-minute prep. You can use it in any difficult conversation, but it works especially well in culturally sensitive situations. Before your next conversation, ask yourself these 3 questions. Number 1, what do I hope to accomplish? Number 2, given what I know about them and the situation, what is likely to be their goal? And number 3, what are 3 open-ended questions that I can ask them that will help me to understand their position? Just taking the time to answer these 3 questions will do wonders for your confidence and performance in these conversations. Conversations about sensitive topics can be tough, and it can be especially awkward when one of the participants doesn't even realize that a conversation needs to happen. So how should you start a difficult conversation? Here's a simple formula you can use to get things started. Situation plus impact plus invitation equals engaged communication. Situation. In this step, you want to describe the situation using what I call naked facts. Facts that are completely stripped of judgment or interpretation. You're describing things in a way that the other person can agree with, regardless of their perception of the situation. For example, instead of saying, you made an offensive joke in the meeting yesterday, you would say, in the meeting yesterday, you said, insert direct quote here. At this point, all you're trying to do is get the person to have a conversation with you on the topic. Impact. In this step, you want to describe the impact of the situation in personal terms. People might disagree with a contention, an argument, or even facts, but it's harder to disagree with your personal evaluation of the effect something had on you. For example, you would say, that made me feel uncomfortable because, or that made me feel concerned that, or that impacted my work because. When addressing an issue that's more professional than personal, it may be more beneficial to frame the impact in terms of what's best for the company. For example, you could say, this may have an impact on our growth because, or this may lead to decreased cohesion and morale because. Invitation. In the final step, you invite them to have the conversation with you using a positive frame. You want to make it an invitation because nobody likes feeling ambushed. The options here are now or later. For example, you might say, I'd like to talk to you about this soon because, or it's important for us to address this as soon as possible because. Now here's what all 3 steps look like together. Situation. In yesterday's meeting, you said XYZ. Impact. That made me feel really uncomfortable. Invitation. I want to have a conversation with you about it because we're going to be working together on this project, and I want to use this as an opportunity for us to get on the same page. A sensitive conversation may never be easy, but with this simple formula, you can make it easier for you and your conversation partner to start with less resistance and more confidence. We've all heard about the importance of empathy in culturally sensitive conversations, but we rarely discuss what makes empathy so hard. Most people don't realize that there are two kinds of empathy: intentional empathy and psychological empathy. Intentional empathy is a choice you make to understand what your conversation partner sees, thinks, and feels about the situation. Psychological empathy, on the other hand, is not a choice. It's a psychological reality. Most of this well-meaning advice fails to acknowledge this very important point. Our ability to empathize is influenced by in-group bias. Studies have shown that it's easier for us to empathize with people who we perceive to be on the same team. Other research has demonstrated that it's simply more difficult to empathize with those who are of different races and ethnicities. This is why the superficial advice to be empathetic in these kinds of conversations is doomed to fail. It's insufficient. One strategy is to use bias in your favor to trick your brain into triggering psychological empathy. While psychological empathy is not a choice in the way that intentional empathy is, you can still trigger psychological empathy even when it doesn't happen naturally, by pointing out similarities between you and the person you're speaking with. Doing so will help you both to overcome biases against each other and allow you to take advantage of the benefits of in-group bias. Empathy is something that can be learned, and the more you challenge yourself to find similarities with those around you, the better you'll be at drawing on empathy when you need it. Respect is one of the most important but least understood elements of culturally sensitive interactions. Many well-meaning people unintentionally disrespect their conversation partner because they don't understand how to demonstrate respect. In the book, Crucial Conversations, the authors say that respect is like air. As long as it's present, nobody thinks about it. But if you take it away, it is all that people can think about. The instant people perceive disrespect in a conversation, the interaction is no longer about the original purpose. It's now about defending dignity. When you feel disrespected in a conversation, you feel unappreciated, unseen, and unheard. So, how do you show respect in these conversations? By listening. Most negotiation and communication experts talk about the virtues of listening, but I believe that listening on its own is never enough. People always say that they want to be heard, but that's not the full truth. So imagine this. Imagine you're talking to someone and they're on their phone the whole time, never acknowledging you. You'd probably accuse that person of not listening to you. But what if they repeat back what you said to them verbatim, proving that they were, in fact, listening? Would you feel satisfied? Probably not. But why? They were clearly listening. You were clearly heard. The reason is that although they listened to you, they didn't validate you, which means that they didn't take the time to show that they cared about you or what you were saying, nor did they show that they found validity in what you were saying or feeling. Although the listener clearly listened to what you said, their body language and their verbal response failed to show that they cared. You don't have to agree with everything that's being said. You can validate by simply demonstrating that you understand how they reach their conclusion based on their perspective. Listening is something that most people struggle with. It's still tough for me, especially when I feel emotional. But listening is a skill that we can improve with time and practice. So try playing this listening game. Give yourself a point if you can get the following to happen in your conversations over the next week. 1. Get your conversation partner to say, "That's a great question." 2. Get your conversation partner to say, "That's right, exactly," or "You got it," after you summarize what they said. Do it again next week, and then compare your points to see if you improved. Remember, showing respect to your conversation partner is essential, especially in culturally sensitive conversations. And by simply honing your listening skills, you'll be able to connect and communicate with your colleagues on a much higher level. Conflict can be scary, particularly when it comes to culturally sensitive topics. This fear often leads people to completely avoid these kinds of conversations. What I've found is that this is mainly an issue of mindset and skill set. Before we change what we do in these conversations, skill set, we have to change how we think about these conversations. Mindset. Here's what you need to know. These conversations are opportunities. The problem is that we often look at these conversations as a source of past and potential future trauma, rather than opportunities for progress, connection, and mutual understanding. Your perspective impacts the way that you engage. Your mind is creative. Whatever you go into these conversations expecting, your mind will help you to find it. This is hard for people to understand because they often conflate conflict with combat. But combat is an altercation where the goal is to inflict more damage than you sustain. If you view conflict as combat, then not only will you be trying to inflict damage in these conversations, but you will also be scared of being hurt. On the other hand, if you see conflict as an opportunity, you'll be looking for opportunities, which can motivate you to push past your discomfort. Making this shift in how we see difficult conversations means developing an opportunity-based mindset. With this mindset, you analyze a situation and look for the opportunities it provides. Conflict provides us with the opportunity to create positive change and solve problems, connect with and learn about others and ourselves, promote equity, improve our skills, abilities, and poise in difficult conversations. When we see conflict as an opportunity, it allows us to navigate difficult conversations without the threat of inevitable pain. If we respect that our conversation partner currently sees the situation one way, while we see the situation another way, we can take advantage of the conflict to learn about the other person's challenges and goals and share our own. If you start with this foundation, you position yourself to work with the other person to create an outcome that's acceptable to both parties. One of the easiest ways to generate positive momentum in these conversations is by finding points of agreement. As we discussed in the video on respect, people want to be heard and validated. Starting with respect will help you to see each other as collaborators rather than combatants, which creates positive momentum for a productive conversation. So here's a challenge for you. In your next difficult conversation, find opportunities to start your response with, "I agree with you," and then expand on the parts of what they said that you can agree with. Doing this will decrease defensiveness and increase psychological safety. Have you ever accidentally offended someone? We all have. But when that accidental offense involves a sensitive aspect of someone's identity, the impact can be greater. After watching this video, you'll be able to define what microaggressions are and how to avoid them in conversations. This is crucial because we are often unaware of the impact our words may have on others. Dictionary.com defines a microaggression as a subtle but offensive comment or action directed at a member of a marginalized group, especially a racial minority, that is often unintentionally offensive or unconsciously reinforces a stereotype. What is a microaggression to one person might not be a microaggression to another person. So here's a quick story. I'm Caribbean American, and growing up I had an accent. Now, after years of code switching, I sound like this. but it still comes out from time to time. On the rare occasion where my accent would come through and people would ask about it, I was always excited to share about my culture. And I remember one time in law school, I heard somebody with an accent and I wasn't sure where they were from, and I said, "Hey, I hear you have an accent. Where are you from?" They found it offensive. So who's right and who's wrong in this situation? Nobody's right and nobody's wrong. It just is what it is. And that's the challenging thing about microaggressions. You're not always sure what people will find offensive. The solution to this isn't a specific strategy per se. It's a shift in mindset. If you commit a microaggression, this is an opportunity for you to learn and connect with the person while rebuilding the relationship. Humbly accept the fact that what you did caused damage, apologize, and seek to do better in the future. Since microaggressions are usually unintentional, you might not even know you made a mistake if the other person doesn't speak up. Pay attention to body language. So if you say something and you recognize a change in their tone or body language, that might signal a negative shift. That's a moment for you to pause and get curious. Stop and ask a simple question. "Hey, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like something may have changed for you. What am I sensing?" Showing interest and curiosity in the person can demonstrate that your intentions are pure and any impact was unintentional, which can go a long way in mending a relationship. One of the biggest mistakes we can make in culturally sensitive conversations is focusing on the intent behind our words more so than the impact. Even though your intentions may be pure, your words may still inadvertently cause harm. This is really important because when you have awareness of your words, it will help you to treat people fairly and respectfully. You will be a better communicator when you understand how well-intentioned words and actions may have a negative impact if they're not calibrated appropriately. It's especially important in culturally sensitive conversations for us to focus on the impact of our words more so than the intent. When somebody has a different background from you, it's possible that the words that you say might have a completely different meaning to them or might be taken in a different way. Understanding this distinction is even more important in situations where somebody is hurt or offended. If you prioritize defending yourself over acknowledging the impact of your words, it sends the message that your reputation is more important than addressing the harm that you caused. The best strategy in these situations is to show empathy and address the impact of your words first. People will be able to understand your intent by how much you show you care about them through your empathy and apology. Did you know that there are times when you, as a well-meaning person, may unintentionally gaslight your colleagues of a different background? There's a simple recipe for it. Confirmation bias plus toxic positivity equals gaslighting. Gaslighting is the act of undermining another person's reality by denying the facts, the environment around them, or their feelings. Here's an example of how well-meaning people may unintentionally gaslight their colleagues. One of my friends confided in me that whenever a colleague of a different background talks about a microaggression, I notice that I have a tendency to just say, "Oh, I'm sure the other person didn't mean it that way." I've seen a lot of my other colleagues do the same thing. It's like we're just trying to justify what happened and explain it away by either saying what happened was unintentional or by minimizing it by saying it wasn't that bad. Why do we do that? One reason I think good people make this mistake is that they genuinely want everything to be okay, which leads them to inadvertently deny that things are not okay. Because of that, and because of confirmation bias, they're going to be drawn to explanations that support their view of the world. And if they can convince their friend of a different background that what happened wasn't offensive, they think it will make their friend feel better. Also, it's likely that, especially at work, they have a relationship with both parties, the perpetrator and the recipient. So not only do they want the person who was the victim to feel better, they also don't want to interpret the situation in a way that makes their colleague seem like a bad person. The trouble with that is that in trying to find a way to protect both of them, it minimizes the experience of the person who was hurt. Despite my friend's positive intentions, by filtering the interaction through their preferred conclusion that what happened wasn't offensive, they're denying the impact of the behavior in question. This is closer to gaslighting than it is to helpful encouragement. You can't solve a problem if you can't or won't see the problem. The simple solution is to honor their experience through empathy. Everyone's an expert in their own lived experience. Honor that and try to see things from their perspective. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the ever-evolving landscape of political correctness? Approaching culturally sensitive interactions from a rules-based perspective can be scary and overwhelming. You don't know all the rules, and it feels like you're walking through a minefield. However, instead of approaching these interactions from a rules-based perspective, it's better to focus on principles such as respect and effective communication. By doing so, we can ensure that our interactions are respectful, inclusive, and effective. Our ultimate goal is to build and maintain positive relationships with others, and focusing on principles rather than rules can make this much easier to achieve. What one word means to you might not be what it means to someone else. Just because we're both speaking English doesn't mean that we're speaking the same language. At this point in history, the world is changing so rapidly that our language is struggling to keep up. The same word can mean different things to different people, and some of the terms you may be using may be completely foreign to your conversation partner. Think, for example, about the use and connotations of personal pronouns in the last few years. The first time somebody asked me for my PGPs, I had to first ask what a PGP stood for. And now, for those of you who are about to Google PGP, it stands for Preferred Gender Pronouns. When someone uses a word you don't understand, or you use a word that you think the other person might not understand, your safest bet is to stop the conversation and get or provide clarification. While asking for a definition sounds like an incredibly basic principle, it is not. Some people would rather misunderstand a term than be embarrassed by displaying a gap in their knowledge. They're afraid of being vulnerable enough to admit that they don't understand. And if either of you is unclear on what the other person is saying, both of you will struggle to communicate effectively. Defining terms also helps us to avoid semantic arguments, which focus on disagreement over the definition of the words being used rather than the relevant facts. Once you've agreed to the definitions of the terms you're using, the conversations should go much more smoothly. The goal here is to have better communication and mutual understanding, and you can achieve this by following the principles of respectful communication. An appropriate apology is the first step to get a damaged relationship back on track. However, if you apologize in the wrong way, it might actually make matters worse. I'm going to help you to identify the ways to rebuild a relationship after you make a mistake. Now remember this important point. Apologizing is a skill. So even though mistakes are inevitable, you can recover if you know what to say, how to say it, and when. Apologizing can be difficult, but one of the most common mistakes is to offer a conditional apology. This occurs when you say, "I'm sorry if," instead of "I'm sorry that." When you say, "I'm sorry if," this calls into question whether the person was actually offended and can make the situation worse. It may give the impression that you're blaming the other person for being hurt. To avoid this, it's better to take responsibility for your actions and say, "I'm sorry that what I said offended you." This shows that you acknowledge the harm you caused and you take full responsibility for it. In this way, you can make a genuine and effective apology. Apologizing is an important aspect of building and maintaining healthy relationships, but over-apologizing can be awkward and ineffective. Repeated apologies for the same offense can become tiresome and make it difficult to move forward. Over-apologizing can be a sign that you're seeking validation for your own feelings of guilt rather than truly trying to make amends with the other person. While it's natural to feel guilty after causing harm, it's not fair to make the other person responsible for resolving these feelings for you. Instead, it's better to apologize respectfully and take the steps to avoid making the same mistake again. Now, this leads me to the last question. When do you apologize? And the answer is as soon as you realize you made the mistake. The longer it takes you to apologize, the less sincere your apology will appear. If a tree falls in the woods and nobody can hear it, did it really make a sound? I always thought this was a silly question because my response was always, who cares? But if we replace a few words, we get a very different question. If an ally isn't able to create positive change, are they really an ally? If you call yourself an ally, but your words and actions don't lead to any meaningful change, then are you really an ally? After watching this video, you'll discover, as an ally, how to use culturally sensitive communication to create positive change. This is a critical step toward becoming a true ally. So what is an ally? I like to think of an ally as someone who stands in solidarity with someone or something in order to support or provide assistance. Whether or not you deserve the title of ally depends on whether you're actually able to create positive change. And an essential part of being able to create change is how active of a role you take in persuading the people around you. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to seek out every opportunity to talk about culturally sensitive issues. Oftentimes, the topic will come up unexpectedly. If you want to maximize your impact, start with this simple truth. Inequity is a problem of bad policy, not bad people. Don't focus on changing people. Focus on changing inequitable policies that create inequitable outcomes. You will get a greater return on investment if you focus on the policies that shape an organization rather than the personal beliefs of the individuals within it. And although people's feelings and beliefs are important and should be taken into consideration, you cannot always wait for people to change before you act. Progress does not move at the speed of comfort. And if we wait for everyone to feel comfortable, we'll wait forever. We can't merely hope that things will get better over time without taking action. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes from continuous struggle. Being an ally is something that you do, not just a title that you hold. Remember, the best things in life are on the other side of difficult conversations. Lean in and use the tools from this course to create the positive change that you want to see. As an ally, you have the power to have a positive impact on your organization and beyond. But creating positive change can be challenging, especially when it involves culturally sensitive conversations. That's why it's important to have the right tools and approach to blend advocacy and efficacy without compromising your authenticity. In this course, you focused on effective communication, blending assertiveness with empathy. You learned the strategies to be both effective and respectful, avoiding predictable barriers to success. By using these tools, you can lean into these conversations wholeheartedly and authentically, ensuring that you are clear, direct, and respectful. One of the best strategies for creating positive change in organizations includes building a strong team of allies. The larger the team, the more power you have. By recruiting allies, you can leverage the strengths of others to advance equity and inclusivity. If you're an ally, you can support your super team by first understanding your strengths and how you can best use them to drive change. Identify inequities and ask for guidance from those who are most affected by the situation. Take action and be clear about your intentions and what you hope to achieve. You don't have to create sweeping change all at once. All you need to do is focus on each conversation and make your goals attainable. Celebrate when you achieve them, no matter how small they may seem. Practice these tools as often as possible so that they become a part of you and you can use them in all of your difficult conversations. Think of negotiation not just as a skill, but as a life philosophy. This mindset can help you to be more intentional in your interactions and keep your skills sharp. Every interaction becomes a practice opportunity, helping you to become a more effective change agent. With the right tools and approach, you have the power to drive meaningful change and make a positive impact on the world.